So anyway, good afternoon, and thank you for attending this press conference. I think it's really important that we get the word out and that you really know what's actually happened over the last couple of years during this investigation to Shirley Ramey. Probably the best thing is just to start out at the beginning. Most of you remember back in April 5th of 2017, 79-year-old Shirley Ramey was found shot and killed at her home on Trestle Creek. So after an extensive 2-year investigation, we've been able to identify the suspect, and the Bonner County Sheriff's Office detectives collected at that time and submitted 9mm casings found at the scene in Hope during that investigation, and those casings were sent to ATF lab for testing using the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. And I just refer to that as NIBIN from now on. Those casings were eventually compared to others submitted for examination, and it was because of this great tool we found an eventual match of the casings that were collected at the scene of the homicide to another incident that had occurred in Libby, Montana. So 57-year-old Judith Marie Carpenter of Coeur, Idaho was arrested for a road rage incident in Montana on April 5th, 2017. And her arrest was at 4:10 p.m. Mountain Time. This is nearly 2 hours before the Ramey homicide had been reported to Bonner County. And this is important to factor in, to refer back to. So the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office at that time seized 2 firearms from her. She was a single occupant, and they seized a 9mm handgun, a Glock 9mm handgun, and they also seized a Savage Model 99 rifle. This was occurred as a road rage incident. She had followed a woman into town off of Bull River Road, and the dispatch there asked them, led that driver into the parking lot, and she was taken into custody without incident. So additional evidence was sent to the crime lab to be examined, and I just want to kind of go over that. A positive match was made from a bullet collected from Ramey crime scene and with the firearm belonging to Carpenter, and further blood DNA evidence has also been submitted. A search warrant yesterday was signed by a judge and was executed in the city of Coeur d'Alene, and thank you. Shouts out to the County County SWAT team and the regional team with Coeur d'Alene Police Department for them assisting us with that arrest and also the search, and also to ATF Special Agent James Butler, who's an integral part of this investigation, which we'll go on a little later. Firearms for examination, and one of the reasons why it took so long for us to submit those is this is a new testing to law enforcement in Idaho. We weren't familiar with NIBIN, and it was based on our partnership with the ATF and the other agencies that we submitted those shell casings to NIBIN, and it started that investigative process. So at the same time frame, request was sent to ATF, by ATF to nearby agencies. And that's why I want to kind of highlight ATF Special Agent James Butler, because if it wasn't for his tenaciousness and his interest in this case, we wouldn't be here today, because he reached out to surrounding agencies and asked if anyone had recovered over the last 2 years a 9mm Glock pistol, and if they had submitted those casings to NIBIN. And he found that Lincoln had, and through the investigation we found out that they were seized the same day as the Ramey murder. And so because of those testings together, we had a positive identification as the same casing that was in her gun and fired at both of the crime scenes. And so it's incredible that through this 2-year process, as we're trying to eliminate suspects and witnesses and trying to find out who was responsible, it appears that it was a random shooting based on what our investigation so far, and that she had driven up that road and somehow ended Shirley's life. So on May 18th, 2019, the Niven system identified those shell casings recovered from Shirley Ramey's murder scene, and also those casings that were sent in from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. So because of that, it matched the same serial number and the same gun. So further investigation of both firearms involved Judith Carpenter revealed the following facts: that Judith Carpenter had purchased a Glock Model 19 pistol from Black Sheep Sporting Goods in Coeur d'Alene on August 2nd, 2005. And also this on 4/3/2017, just a few days before the homicide, Judith Carpenter took that same gun, checked it in at the border crossing in Canada, went into Canada and came out, so we have a record of that. So she was in possession of that gun a couple of days before the homicide. So really based on the totality of all of the evidence, we have no doubt that we have the right person responsible for the Shirley Ramey murder. And she was booked into jail on $500,000 bond. Since she was booked, that's been raised to $1 million. And she has her passport. She had to surrender her passport, and she's prohibited from leaving the state of Idaho. And she was going to be monitored. So that's kind of the synopsis of how we got to this time today. I do have Special Agent in Charge Derek Pleasance, who's sitting in the front, who actually runs the office in Washington, and may have questions about NIBIN and those procedures. And I also have our lead detective, Phil Stella, who's here. So you may have some questions. I also should note that this is the very first case NIBIN had in the state of Idaho where they've able to match up shell casings with a homicide. And so we're excited to have that new tool, and starting from the time that we found out about this new tool, I'm a huge advocate, and I'll be really singing the song and praises of this program. So if you have questions, we'd be glad to answer those questions, and if you have a specific...
ATF Special Agent in Charge from the Seattle Field Division. Your question, sir, if you'd repeat it regarding, asked about NIBIN.
Yeah, I was just curious what the link was that brought the suspect into the light. Was it the NIBIN search from the casings, the 9mm casings?
It was the linkage between the casings from the crime scene and casings that were fired from the Glock 9mm when it had taken into law enforcement custody. When a firearm fires, the projectile is under a lot of pressure, and it leaves indelible forensic tool marks on the shell casing from the extractor, from the firing pin, and from the process of ejecting that fired cartridge casing from the weapon. When that is recovered, we take that and we put that into a 360-degree high-definition camera, 4,000 pixels, and that takes a 360-degree image. It then enters that fired cartridge casing image into a database where 3 times a day or 4 times a day, regionally and nationwide, it is compared to other fired cartridge casings that have been entered in. When the firearm, this is the Libby, Montana, when the firearm that was recovered in Libby was test fired and put into the system and compared against the cartridge casings that were recovered at the crime scene, it was indicative that that firearm had produced all those cartridge casings, linking that firearm to the killer.
So you did that. That happened because ATF, in not finding a match previously, had reached out to other area law enforcement, said you have this type of weapon that's been taken in, because this just happened recently.
No, it's an interesting question, because we, as you're asking, we ask for people for specific input as a type of a weapon. What happens is certain firearms, when they make a mark on a cartridge casing, we can determine what model, what series of firearms made that. And that's why a request goes out looking for a specific make and model of a firearm, because the tool marks are so indicative that they can be traced back to that. That helps us narrow our perspective. The NIBIN program is growing nationwide. What we're doing in Eastern Washington and here in Idaho is taking that focus and working on our more rural communities and developing proof of concept for the tactics and techniques to leverage this. So what we do is we work with Bonner County and other agencies with an idea that we want to get as many ballistic pieces of evidence put into the system. ATF operates under the principle that we believe we have multiple cases that we can solve for violent crimes around the country with evidence that we already have in law enforcement custody. We are now using NIBIN to try and exploit that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.